Hello, everybody. Welcome to Crypto Talks. My name is Jake Brukhman. Today we have Jake Vartanian here from Native. Hi, Jake. Welcome.
Hey, Jake. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on the show.
So you have been around blockchain for a while. I'd love to get into that a little bit. And right now you're working on a project called Native, which is using blockchain technology to kind of build and incentivize communities. So we'd love to dig into that. But let's start with kind of where do you come from and what's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I originally got into the crypto space in early 2011. It was my first year of college, and I had a friend who was studying computer science and was like, "Hey, you got to check this out. This is this Bitcoin thing out. You can basically send value around the world and have it settle in somebody's account in 15 minutes." And and my immediate kind of response was, let's go out and see if it is real. So I went to, at the time there was very limited options to purchase Bitcoins, but basically you had to use like a MoneyGram phone and go through a couple services and basically like pray that they show up in your wallet a couple hours later. So after that, and I sent some to a friend, and it worked, and I was totally blown away, and that kind of just led me down a path of self-study for a couple of years, kind of from the period of, I would say, 2011 to 2014 or so, mostly self-study, and then around 2014 I started to do some kind of community evangelism work for a couple early projects before Ethereum launched.
So was this while you were still in school? You were studying Bitcoin?
I was honestly not a great student. I was somebody who generally learned in when I kind of chose my own topic and just decided to dive in on my own rather than kind of structured learning in the traditional sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have sort of a background from when I was like very young around just kind of trading stocks, trading options. My father kind of drilled a lot of that stuff into me at a very young age, which especially things like technical analysis got me really interested in like, what is the actual nature of value? And when trading kind of traditional stocks in these super large markets, it's really hard to see how the value is actually what it actually is, because there's so many things at play from so many parties all around the world. But at the time in crypto, when there was not too many people and very few there's Bitcoin and a couple of altcoins, you could track kind of what was going on to a much more specific degree, and you could really see, okay, this story, for example, had a direct impact on this token's price point. And kind of looking at things in that way, I was like, wow, it's really the kind of collective emotional sentiment of the people who decide to believe in this coin, token, whatever it is, and give it their energy to perpetuate its value over time. Almost in a similar way as like a belief system, like a religion. One could almost say.
Yeah.
And so that kind of frame of thinking, one of the original kind of projects that I ended up working on kind of professionally, as I mentioned, was community management, kind of project evangelism, sharing what these projects were doing. And the project that I worked on first was Scenario, which was one of the first projects that kind of laid out attention as value, and kind of had this model of the more amps that you put towards your posts, the more people would see that content, the more people that saw it, the more engagement it would get. And to me, that kind of that perspective on what value is made a lot of sense.
Scenario is like a really interesting one too, because it's really like one of the first I guess, decentralized social media approaches, right? In blockchain, one of the very, very first. And but just to go back just a second, so you have this, period of time where you're studying these things. Are you studying them more from the perspective of like trading, right? Or are you studying sort of like the underlying blockchain technology or something else? Like what is, like, how do you come at the space?
Yes, I would say that initially I was very interested in just the fact that sending this value was possible and how these distributed ledgers are able to I'll say transmit, record, validate value without requiring this sort of central database or central administrator kind of managing all the transactions. So I would say there was kind of a combination of both the architecture of the blockchain is combined with the trading, which I think that's it's really important for me. It's like if I'm gonna be purchasing something, to really and talking about it and saying this is a good thing, to really know what it is. So while I'm not necessarily a like a full-time programmer, I like to like understand the shapes of things, how certain algorithms are designed, why blockchains are set up in certain ways. And I think it, for me, provided a really solid balance to where I could interact with almost anybody in the space, whether they were traders, were more serious developers, even if it's not at like a granular line by line code base kind of level.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're coming, you're kind of watching the space develop from 2011. You work with Scenario, one of the earliest projects around social media. What else? What other projects have you worked with?
So around the time Ethereum started doing token launches, the founder of Singular DTV reached out to me and asked if we could kind of work together on preparing the campaign for their token launch. And this was the I'm pretty sure first launch out of kind of connected to consensus, and one of the earlier token launches just on Ethereum, period. And this was I believe that's actually kind of how we kind of met originally.
Mm-hmm.
And after that token launch was very successful, I immediately kind of realized, wow, a lot of people are going to be doing this, and nobody really knows how to do it yet. So I was like, so I basically had a really solid template of what this generally looked like. So I decided to start my own kind of independent consulting business around kind of helping different projects with their launches. So after Singular DTV was the I believe October 2016. So then around 2017, I was really just I was there was no other token launch consulting firms, so people just started to call me very often. And at the kind of peak of it all, I was receiving probably 10 to 15 inbound requests a day.
Wow.
For different projects that wanted to help with very little kind of marketing on on the side of my own agency. So that was kind of a shock to me, because I had never really run a business before, and it just blew up so fast. So I got to be very selective in the types of projects that I worked on, and felt very, very privileged. Definitely some luck involved in that, in kind of positioning at that right time. Some of the other projects that I've worked on in that 2017 period included Rex MLS, which is now called Imbrex, Token Card, which is based in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say the kind of most well-known project that I worked with was the Bancor protocol leading up to their token launch. And for me, Bancor was really a groundbreaking way to kind of make markets and provide liquidity, that kind of, it just changed the structure of what an exchange, what it means to convert tokens, where you don't need to match two parties on either side of an order book, but rather can just plug tokens into a global liquidity network. And now Bancor was also one of the kind of first, was definitely a project that was very hard to explain because so many of the concepts were so foreign. So that was kind of part of what I was helping them with, was like, how do we make this, make sense to people, especially if you're not taking the time to read it, which in my experience, people generally do not want to do.
Right. Okay. And so I guess that brings us to maybe like the second half of 2017, when I believe you started working on Native. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. So so after the Bancor launch, I kind of, I'll say one of the kind of I guess I call it a feature or types of things that you can do on Bancor is what they call a smart token. And a smart token basically holds a certain amount of a base token in reserve, and based on the amount in the reserve, the supply of the new token that's generated, and the reserve level that's chosen, you can actually reach a fair market value of that token at any given time through the kind of the protocol's algorithms, pricing algorithms. And so what this basically means is you can set a reserve. Let's just a high level example. If you set a reserve level of 10% and you put $10,000 into this some new token, that means that your new token, to a certain, in one sense, has now a $100,000 market cap. So the question for me was like, well, I get that. It makes a lot of sense. And I see why it's the case, but that token in my mind isn't necessarily automatically really worth that much, because it's let's just say one person puts funds into it. Now you just have a pile of funds sitting in a contract somewhere, or in a couple contracts, but there's no kind of activity going on within that token ecosystem, I guess I'll say. So it kind of took me back to that original question that I had asked of myself, is like, what is value actually, and how can we build a platform that takes this kind of abstract concept and makes it as tangible and as collectively agreed upon as possible. And that's where, so if we look at value as like a common language of expression that like anybody can understand, I can go anywhere in the world and say, hey, this is $1. People will generally know what that means. But in this case of the smart token, $1 might mean that there is 10 cents in reserve plus a bunch of other things going on. So how do we track those other things? And at a high level, I think of it like, how many people are actively engaged in this community? What does active engagement look like? Are the people who are in this community voting on things that are relevant to the community's mission, purpose, vision? Are they completing the tasks or the bounties that have been assigned in the community? So stuff's getting done. Are they collectively deciding which projects should be funded with the community's resource pool? And are they executing on those projects?
So are you thinking about these community tokens as more of like a local currency for communities, or are you thinking of them more as a a token that's backed by kind of like a specific set of economic activities, if that makes, like, is it more equity or is it more currency?
I hesitate to use the word equity, but I would say that a community's currency, and the overall kind of sum total of that currency is the value of the community. So I guess a good way to put it is the community. I look at communities almost like products, where when I want to join a community, I'm making a transaction, and in the case of native, I'm taking a base token and I'm converting it into the token for that community, which which generates those community tokens, of those tokens into a contract to become a member. Now, those tokens can be unstaked, so I'm not necessarily spending that value, but I'm just taking a certain portion of my attention, or energy or money or whatever we want to call it, and allocating it into that community, basically saying, I care about this, I want to support it. So in that way, it's kind of it's like this synthesis of all of the things, where eventually, we can all take the kind of accumulated capital, or stored up energy, I can say sometimes, that we have, and distribute it into a bunch of different sort of groups that we want to participate in, and provide more resources to the specific things that we want to see manifested in the world.
So this is really interesting, and this, I think this has been a theme in blockchain for years, as we try to understand, what is it that makes a speculatively traded asset like Bitcoin valuable versus what is a token that is giving you access to some kind of service, like why is that valuable, versus like why is a community currency or something like that, why is that valuable? So what do you see as the mechanism by which, because this is a token that has to do with the community, it's used for, within that community, maybe for staking or voting, it's maybe used as a medium of exchange, like what is the mechanism that values how much that is worth, right? Like, how do you think about that? When you think about traditional economics, you're often looking at the imports and exports of countries and things like that, and that helps you to think about, why is this currency valued more than this other currency, kind of on a nation state level. But how does a community token get the value or reflect the value of that community?
So I think there's two main frames to look at this from. At a I'll say at a potential member level, like if I'm going to go join a community, one, I want to look at what is this, what is me allocating funds to this community, or converting funds into this community token, going to do for me. Now, when I think of benefits of joining communities, I'm like, okay, well, primarily, maybe not primarily. I'll say one thing that I'm getting is access to the other community members. Now, maybe the other community members are willing to provide 15, 30 minutes, an hour of their time in a specific kind of whatever their thing is. And, in the case of a lot of people, that time alone could justify the cost of a membership. So in that case, I'm basically purchasing the access to that community as a product. So for me, from a potential member perspective, that could be all somebody really cares about or needs to know. What am I getting for doing this, and do I want to continue participating over time?
Okay, gotcha. So you're kind of thinking about these communities almost as a, on a net or expert network kind of level, right? So do you admit, maybe one community is a community of, interior designers or something that could give you advice on interior design, or people who play guitar or something like that. Is that the way you kind of break up the community lines?
Totally. So, I mean, the cool thing about like the set of tools that we've built is like it's very flexible, and we get to choose kind of which verticals we really want to focus on and develop for. So then we can take those verticals, turn them into templates, and then let anybody who has a community in those verticals to just deploy a kind of comprehensive community as a product solution, I guess I'll say. So let's take the interior design example and say, okay, so yes, you can gain access. Maybe you get 30 minutes with, or an hour with some kind of specific designer. And then maybe that design community also has partnerships with, fabric stores, furniture stores, all these kinds of things. If you're your design community, then you get discounts at their kind of network of partners, which adds another sort of value layer to being included in that community. And then kind of from the other side, let's say I'm an interior designer and not somebody who wants interior design. I might also have incentive to join that community almost as a promotional tool. Now I'm plugging myself into this network of other designers and people who need designers. So my incentive as a designer to join, basically gives me access to a whole new potential client base, as well as, I think that's kind of the main thing, whole new kind of client base. So I think at that member level, is that kind of clear from like the community as a product side?
Yes, I think so.
So then the other side that to kind of look at it from is more of like, thinking of this kind of the local currency side, and like, what is this community as a whole actually worth? You could say, what is the market cap of this community? And when I think about, market cap of a community, there's one, the kind of tangible Bancor reserve value, which can be for sure, here's how much value you're going to get if you decide to convert back out of this community token into a base or some other community. But also kind of taking these, as I mentioned before, like the activity levels of how many votes are being completed. Are they doing the work? Are they successfully voting to collectively deciding to fund certain projects and executing those projects? Then we can take those sort of variables and basically say, what is this community's like health score? Are these communities, how do I say, are they actually functional, and are they truly worth joining? Because there's so many kind of facets when thinking about joining these communities, and I want to know before I join, is this worth my time and energy? And I think over time, as we kind of gain a lot more data, as we find like our first great kind of use cases that we want to replicate at scale, then we have a very strong, we can basically create a very strong algorithm to determine these community health grades, and basically present them on a dashboard. So when I'm looking at communities, not only am I seeing what are the benefits that I'm getting, but is this community actually thriving?
So let's go back to the concept of community for a second. Are you thinking, when I think of like Reddit, right, I'm thinking about people who are coming together online and sort of sharing content, right, and analysis of that content. And that's very much like a global online digital community where everyone accesses that community using the internet, right? And when you think about something like meetup.com, right? You have an aspect of that. You have an online digital presence, but ultimately these are people who live in the same city. They meet up together in person, and it's very much like a real life activity.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see? And also, I want to now kind of get into like what is native and what are the tools that it provides. But is this a tool for online communities, real life communities, or both?
This is a tool for definitely both. So I would say, how do I think of a community? Any group of people who is organized around a common interest, mission, or I think interest or mission's a good kind of comprehensive view. It can be anything from, we live in the same physical location and therefore want to kind of isolate our microeconomy through this kind of token proposition, through this community economy proposition. And then also on the total other side of it, it's, with the internet today, with social media platforms, basically you can take anything with a Facebook group, as long as people care about it and want to participate in it. And you could create a community around whatever that Facebook group is. So for example, we have right now like a fan generated Rick and Morty community as one of our test cases, just to kind of show that, here we can create these things around entertainment. We can create them around interior design. We can create them around pretty much events, publications. It's a very wide net in how I kind of define a community. And there are so many communities today that are doing so much in the world, but in the kind of traditional economy, their value isn't fully able to be realized because of the ways that we understand value and trade it, I guess I'll say, in an economy. But there are so many other aspects of value where, you have 20,000 people who are all aggregated together around some common mission. To me, that in itself is extremely valuable.
Gotcha. And so people who are watching this, they might be familiar with a project in blockchain called Eragon project. Eragon project is, has been around for a couple of years. I advise them also, as full disclosure, but the point is that, Eragon is first and foremost, a technological framework on Ethereum for the creation of these things called DAOs. DAOs stands for decentralized autonomous organizations. And basically, this is an on-chain smart contract that allows an organization to kind of set its rules and issue a token, maybe as a right or. And I guess my question is, like, how does native like compare and contrast with something like Eragon? Because it feels like, you could use like an Eragon tool set to do some of the functions that you're describing, namely to like maintain maybe like a governance of the community, maintain a digital asset as a voting or governance token, or as a currency even. So what are the differences between like how you're approaching this space and maybe like how the DAO space is developing alongside of your product?
Totally. Awesome question. And I would first just like to say, I love everything that those guys do. Luis and Jorge are amazing, amazing people, and just, pushing the boundaries on what's possible on a regular basis. And I would say that at a high level, I'll go a little deeper after the kind of basic equation of native is Bancor plus Eragon. Eragon, if we look at it like an iceberg, it's like Bancor provides that kind of value, the language proposition that can be expressed to a kind of global economy. And then the DAO piece, the governance piece, kind of is what is actually validating and making that value true. So native, you could almost look at it as one of the first use cases for protocols like Bancor and like Eragon. And we're very much kind of keeping attuned with Eragon's development, and over time, if it makes sense, when it makes sense to us, we would love to actually deploy an Eragon DAO for each community that we generate. Because frankly, for me, I respect what they're doing. And it's just so vast. Same with Bancor, that it's like if other groups can handle those kind of pieces of the equation to a large degree, and I can trust that they're doing the best kind of job that's going to be done in both of those sides of things, then I would like to focus my time on, providing the best kind of synthesized interface between the two, providing a functional product that we provide all of the kind of recommendations of how the governance should be set up, how the token should be set up, depending on what community types that each one's doing. So ultimately, somebody who has pretty limited sort of technical or economic knowledge still has the ability to create and operate tokenized economies, and hopefully, as in I would say maybe a year to 18 months, in a way that's as easy to use as something like a Facebook.
Got it. Very interesting. It's super exciting to think about how the different kind of infrastructural and middleware technologies that have been building over time eventually come together and begin to interoperate. I know the guys over at A16Z refer to that as composability, and it's going to be super interesting to see, like, for example, Eragon DAOs running, live peer transcoders or sitting in as governance tools within Native. So at this point, you mentioned before you might be able to kind of share a little bit about the application itself. Is that something that you're comfortable doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess what I'll say kind of before diving in is we have a proof of concept that we launched on October 1st. We started with a few test communities, and actually the day before we launched, MetaMask upgraded their version. It was like 14 hours before or something, and on day one, it's like it just changed enough things to where like it wasn't super functional. And I was like before we even, like, on the first minute of launch, I'm like, wow, like this is real. This is the state of these applications today. And on one end, it's like awesome that we get to kind of push things forward on this front, but on the other end, it was a very clear indicator of how early we really are in this space. But in just a month and a half, the amount that we've kind of been able to learn around, like, what are the types of communities that actually are going to make sense for Native right now versus what are going to make sense in the future. Is the onboarding process easy enough for for a community that doesn't have tech-oriented users to be able to use it effectively? And what are the actual functions that communities require to consider it a comprehensive and usable product? And then finally, how do we keep the engagement to where they keep coming back? Because you're not gonna, in a sort of governance protocol without more of a social media component, you're not going to go to a DApp so you can vote every single day. It just doesn't like fit into people's kind of, or at least I'll say even my own kind of frame of thinking. Yeah, maybe once in a while when something relevant's happening, but we've quickly realized that we need a much more robust and comprehensive kind of tool set that really make people feel like they are part of something and want to continuously be in that thing over time.
Awesome. So we'd love to see whatever you're willing to share, and maybe you can walk us through that a little bit.
Totally. So let me 1 second. I'm just gonna get it prepared here and then share my screen. Let me pop up the Brave browser. Into MetaMask here. No, my MetaMask does not want to open. Hold on 1 sec.
Yeah, I know MetaMask is like pretty squirrely across browsers these days.
You know, and they've done so many upgrades that it's like sometimes Brave's better, sometimes there we go. Sometimes Chrome's better, and you know, I think that some of the upgrades that they've done recently are great, but require kind of a lot of changes to make sure that it's kind of continuously compatible over time.
Mm-hmm. So is this running? I'm going to shut up for a second so this can go into kind of the main. All right, here we go. Is this running on Ethereum testnet or on mainnet?
This is running on mainnet.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
So right now we have 4 communities live on the platform. This is kind of just like an overview of all the communities page, and this is kind of before we're actually logged in, I believe. Yes, we'll see in a second. But you know, right now it's a kind of really basic around what are the things that you can kind of see. I'll use Dolo as an example. So Dolo is a decentralized open learning organization where that basically connects students with educators, and the students who are members kind of will get to vote on which courses that they want the educators to make. Once they've made the kind of vote on which course they want, then a task can be created for an educator to actually create that content. And then we can do kind of, they're building out the back end of this infrastructure now. And basically you can integrate a simple Web3 check to see if an Ethereum address is a member of that community. And then if so, you can unlock the all the content. So, and I think that in itself is a huge feature of both of native and Web3 in general, is specific access based on certain conditions of any address at any given time.
So is there content here? Like if I'm not a member of Dolo, but then I become a member of Dolo, do I get access to kind of the content of this community?
Yes, exactly.
And if so, okay, where is that content stored? Is that sort of your application storing the business data, or is it stored in a decentralized way?
So for right now, the one there, the community has to kind of build out that. In the case of Dolo, it's a pretty robust kind of piece of infrastructure that's required in a kind of learning platform. And Native doesn't really have the interest to develop that ourselves. So that is kind of part of their initial purpose, is to bring on these members who can, 1, become a member of the community, and 2, start to kind of help them in the creation process of this infrastructure. Bringing on teachers and so the teachers can provide recommendations, getting recommendations from students about what they actually want to see in this platform. So really, instead of developers just kind of building it by themselves and then preventing a complete product, this product between the students, the teachers, and the developers to leave a result that's kind of that everybody wants.
Got it.
So let's say we will go to our dashboard here. It's going to ask us to sign a MetaMask transaction to authenticate our account, and we'll just go in here. So I have about 7 ETH in this wallet right now. And so you can see here, there is the kind of list of all of the different communities as well as Native itself. So there's a converter right here where you can choose, how much ETH that you want to convert into Native tokens. And then you can actually just make that conversion. I'll just reject it for right now because that would be a live transaction. And then that would kind of add to the balance. Or actually, we could go through the whole thing, but I'll just go through the quick overview, and then if we want to go deeper, we can. So once you kind of convert the ETH into Native, now you have the base token, which is kind of what allows you to join the communities. So you can see here, we are a member of, in this account, the Rick and Morty community and the Earth Guardians community. We're not a member of Cosmic Convergence and not a member of Dolo. So, but you can see, since we are one here, then we can actually go in and we can see that we have this below the fold stuff. Looks like we need to get this kind of update in there. So it seems like the votes have kind of, that were active, have all expired right here, but basically everything below this piece of information, below this kind of information, becomes available. So right now we have like a link to a Telegram that only shows up once you're a member, but we'll have to kind of integrate much more integrated communications tools over time. And then at the end of, so right now votes are active, and the community administrator can go in and actually create new votes for people to be able to vote on. They can set how much time they want it to be. Tasks are coming out at the end of this month, and then projects in the middle to I would say before year end. And so with the tasks, the administrator can assign how many tokens the person's going to receive for completing the task. The person who does it contributes or sends the work back to the administrator, and they approve it. Projects are proposed by the administrator, and then it turns into a community vote where the community gets to decide whether or not it's a good kind of use of their funds. And so right now, kind of in the, kind of going back to your question of like centralization versus decentralization, this is not 100% decentralized. But what is decentralized is anything that has to do with a financial transaction. Because those, to me, are the things that are the sort of most important. What Native actually provides is kind of an interface for these communities, but the true finality in any sort of situation is, where is the value at any given time. And so as it kind of makes sense from a for us, we will continue to kind of move towards that full path of decentralization. But lately I've kind of been, I'm a very kind of ideological person at heart, but in terms of decentralization, but in terms of kind of practicality in relation to where the space is and where the general population is right now, I think that this kind of hybrid structure makes a lot more sense and gives us some kind of like workaround while these governance structures are really being totally refined.
I think definitely, we see many processes around bringing up kind of decentralized networks as a gradual process that starts out, more centralized or even totally centralized, and then gradually sort of decentralizes over time, right? So even today, right, like a lot of the tools that you would need in a decentralized context to even, store basic like business data are still in very nascent stages, right? So you have kind of decentralized networks that do storage, but they're slow and sort of like underutilized and not necessarily like the best solution today. And then you have things like the Graph that are providing basic querying of these sort of decentralized data storage, but and similar companies, but those are like at very early stages and are not really, in production yet. So I think like over time, you're going to get a lot more of this different kinds of decentralized infrastructure that you'll be able to integrate here and make use of a gradually increasing kind of decentralization curve. So that's nice.
Totally. And the two kind of pieces to that. One is, this idea of a curator or an administrator. I really like this concept because one, you have an initial kind of person who has the vision for the organization, we'll say, and they are kind of best suited to determine, hopefully best suited to determine sort of what should be done next to ultimately achieve the goal of the community. But the kind of buffer in place there to where it's not this kind of like tyrannical situation is, they're not necessarily making all the decisions on their own, but they're rather proposing what they want to do to the community, who are then either verifying or rejecting the proposal from the administrator. So it kind of gives a buffer there, and then ultimately we'll have to add kind of more functions to where maybe in certain cases the communities can decide to they feel like he's a bird doing a great job, I should say. Basically, I think you're spot on. Like, we want to provide flexibility for these organizations. What are all the different toggles that they can decide? Here's member weight, like one-to-one voting, token weighted voting, liquid democracy, quadratic. Here's why you would want to use each one of these things. Here's the different reserve levels that we recommend and why, based on the current stage that you're at in your community. Do you want to be able to overthrow the administrator? And then people can start to get a new sort of frame around, okay, what is the level of decentralization or power that I have as an individual in this organization, and am I comfortable with that structure? And that, I think that freedom to choose is really one of the most important aspects of kind of this decentralized financial ecosystem that is emerging, right? That's emerging right now. We can opt in to the things that we want to participate in, and if I don't like the structure of something, then I'll just go somewhere else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then I guess my last question for you, and then maybe we can kind of tell folks what they can do to be involved. But the last question is, like, what kind of KPI, like as the product owner here, right? Like, what kind of KPIs do you want to be tracking for the native product that will inform you like how you're doing? It could be like number of communities, it could be like liquidity in your tokens. Like, how do you think about measuring the growth of this thing?
So I'd like to talk about like kind of two different time frames and KPIs for different time frames. Let's say the next 18 months, the KPIs are: one, do we have these kind of 3 to 5 verticals that we've fleshed out completely to where we can go to anybody with that type of community and say, hey, launch a community, right now, and is it fluid? Is it a seamless process for these communities to onboard their people, to be productive within that organization? And are we truly creating that emotional kind of sense of community? And I think in that, not at a number of community levels, but within the examples we have, what is the kind of feedback from users that we're receiving? Is it gradually getting more positive over time? Is the experience that they're having becoming more and more seamless? And then kind of once we move past that sort of 18-month trajectory, and then I would say also more community organizers who are interested to launch a community on native, just kind of as in flowing into our kind of queue, I'll say. And then after that 18 months, it's like, then once we do have those templates for 3 to 5 verticals set up, how many people are deploying them? And are they growing? 2, are they executing the whatever they're doing? And three is the are the mechanics of the model attuned to the needs of these organizations? One kind of main thing that we're working through right now is providing people the option of whether they want to actually use native token as a base, or if they would prefer to leverage something more like a DAI in their base. Because if you have a one group that we're in conversations with is like a decentralized digital production studio, and they're like, this is awesome. We want to use this as like basically a like a tokenized version of Asana. And but then you have this kind of complication if they use native token as a base, because they have to pay their bills, and the price of native token kind of can move depending on the size of the network at any given time. So if you have a bill to pay and the number of communities drops for whatever reason, now you might not have the liquidity that you need to pay that bill. That makes sense for some communities, but maybe not others. But in the case of others, now what we can say is choose your own reserve. Decide, like, if you do need to pay bills in US dollars right away, let's use DAI. So now all your tokens have a kind of directly correlated USD value. And in that case, we kind of turn into something closer. That side of things turns into a software as a service model for these organizations that don't want to really take the time to build this infrastructure, but just want an increasingly functional product over time that meets their needs effectively and allows them to take in a client, get the capital, or like receive funds for a project, and then have smart contracts automatically allocate the work items that they do to their wallets once they've completed the work, and kind of just streamlining a lot of those processes, which I'll say with a kind of combined effort of a bunch of different applications you can do today, but it's not like quick.
Awesome. Well, Jake, thank you so much for giving us the background on Native, which is basically a tool for decentralized communities to issue tokens, some elements of Bancor there to provide liquidity for those tokens, and some interesting ideas about how digital assets are kind of backed by and fundamentally valued by the communities that they serve as these almost local currencies or staking tokens. If someone is interested in trying out Native, or maybe they're a community manager, what should they do? Like, where should they go?
So I think the first place to kind of get more general information is our website, nativeproject.one. And then if you are an Ethereum user today with MetaMask, then just try out joining a community and see how the process goes, and start to what I love designing token models. That's like my main thing. So what I always ask people to do is think about your organization, think about all the kind of different touch points of interactions that you have, and how does it make sense for your organization to integrate a token to streamline all these processes. And once you have the kind of frame in mind, then create a little one-page document that's like, here's the overview, here's the touch points, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and here's why we think this could be a good fit for Native. And then in the same kind of way I did with my consulting company, we like to kind of go back and forth and let's iterate through these one pagers together and come up with a structure that really makes sense and is going to work at this point in time, or or decide if it maybe makes sense to launch this community later once we have a more kind of robust set of tools for the communities to use. But anybody can join our Telegram, ping me or anybody kind of listed on our pinned message directly, say, hey, I have a community that I want to start, let's talk about it. And right now we're onboarding as it makes sense. And once we do have those sort of groups that are super refined and we can turn them into templates, then we can start scaling it out much faster.
Fantastic. All right, check out the native app and get in touch with Jake on Telegram. Jake, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to wrap. Guys,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you for coming. All right, everybody, take care.